My name is Violet, and I am 28 years old. I am the eldest daughter in my family, though for most of my life that role felt less like a privilege and more like a punishment. People often say the firstborn carries the most responsibility, but in my house it wasn't responsibility I carried, it was blame. I grew up in a small town in a modest house with peeling paint and a yard that always seemed overgrown. My parents worked hard, or at least that's what they told people. But no matter how many hours they claimed to put in, there was never enough money, never enough affection, never enough warmth. At least not for me. From as early as I can remember, it was my younger sister Allie who was bathed in light. She was 2 years younger with soft curls and a sweet smile that melted everyone's heart. When she cried, my mother would rush to soothe her. When she laughed, my father would beam with pride. And when I stood in the corner clutching my books or trying to get their attention, I was ignored. Or worse, scolded. "Stop being difficult, Violet. Why can't you be more like your sister? You always cause problems." Their words became the rhythm of my childhood, echoing through every memory like a cruel refrain. I remember one birthday, my 12th. I had spent weeks saving small coins from doing chores for neighbors, enough to buy myself a secondhand novel from a tiny bookshop downtown. It wasn't much, but to me it was treasure. On the day of my birthday, I held it close, waiting for someone to notice. My parents gave Allie a doll with golden hair, smiling as she squealed in delight. And when I showed them my book, proud of my little gift to myself, my father frowned. "Why waste money on that?" he muttered. "Books don't feed anyone. You should have given that money to us." The shame I felt in that moment still burns in me. Not only did they not celebrate me, they made me feel guilty for even wanting something of my own. It only grew worse as we got older. Allie's opinions mattered more than mine in every argument. If we disagreed, it was automatically my fault. If something broke in the house, I was blamed, even if Allie had been the one to touch it. If Allie wanted something, a dress, new shoes, a trip with her friends, it was given. If I wanted something, I was told we didn't have the money. And yet, despite the unfairness, I kept trying. Because that's what children do. They crave their parents' love, even when it's withheld. I studied hard, hoping my grades would make them proud. I cooked meals, cleaned the house, took care of Allie when they were too busy. But nothing changed. Their eyes always turned to her. The breaking point came when it was time for me to graduate high school. I had dreamed of going to college, of studying literature, and maybe becoming a teacher. I filled out applications in secret, pouring my heart into essays about resilience and hope. And when I finally told my parents, praying they'd support me, they laughed. "College." My father scoffed. "Who's going to pay for that?" "Not us. You think you're better than your sister." "You should be working, Violet," my mother added coldly. "This family needs you. Allie has a future. You should focus on helping us." Those words shattered me. Allie was standing in the doorway that day, smiling faintly as though she had won some unspoken game. She was already promised the chance I was denied. She would be supported, encouraged, carried forward. And me, I was the burden. So I did as they demanded. I worked. I found part-time jobs, saved pennies, gave most of my money to my parents, who always said they needed it for bills, for groceries, for Allie's needs. I told myself it was temporary, that if I just kept going, they would see my worth. But they never did. At 18, I moved out. Not because they pushed me, but because the weight of their disdain became unbearable. I rented a tiny apartment, just one room with peeling wallpaper and a mattress on the floor. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of freedom. Still, the guilt followed me. Every time I bought groceries, I felt the urge to send money back home. Every time I saved for myself, I heard my mother's voice saying, "You should be helping us." And often I did send money. Hundreds, then thousands over the years. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that maybe one day they'd appreciate me. But as the years passed, I noticed something strange. Despite all the money I sent, nothing seemed to improve for them. Their house stayed the same. Their complaints stayed the same. And yet Allie always had new clothes, new gadgets, new opportunities. I began to realize the truth, that my sacrifices weren't helping the family. They were funding Allie's life. The betrayal of that realization cut deep. I wasn't just ignored, I was being used. Then one day, everything changed. I was 27, working at a small publishing company, finally finding joy in words again. My boss had invited me to a dinner party at a fancy restaurant downtown. I almost didn't go. I felt out of place among successful people, but something inside me whispered that it was time to step into the life I deserved. The restaurant was glittering with lights, laughter filling the air. I wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant, but when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. For once, I saw not the unwanted daughter, but a woman with dignity. That's when I saw them. My parents, my sister, sitting at a table across the room. Allie was dressed elegantly, her hair styled perfectly. My mother fussing over her like always, my father boasting to the man seated beside him. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. It had been years since I last saw them. I thought I had escaped their shadow, but there they were, thriving, laughing, pretending as though I never existed. And then Allie saw me. For a split second her smile faltered. My parents turned, their eyes widening. Shock rippled across their faces, not the joy of seeing me after so long, but something darker. Disbelief, annoyance, fear. My father's lips curled. What is she doing here? The words carried across the room, sharp enough to pierce through the noise of clinking glasses. Heads turned, guests stared. My cheeks burned, my hands trembling. I wanted to run, to vanish, to shrink back into the girl they had always told me I was. But then a man stepped forward. My colleague who had invited me placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Violet," he said warmly, "come, I want to introduce you to some people." In that moment, I straightened my spine. I forced myself to smile. I walked past my parents, past Allie, and joined my colleagues. And for the first time, I realized something powerful. They no longer held power over me. Their words, their disdain, it could only define me if I let it. Still, as I left the restaurant that night, my heart ached. Because no matter how strong I felt, no matter how far I had come, the wounds they left in me were still raw. The past wasn't finished with me yet. And I didn't know then, but that night was only the beginning. Because buried beneath their smiles, their laughter, their lies were secrets darker than I could have imagined. Secrets that would drag me back into the storm I thought I had escaped. In the days after that dinner party, I couldn't get the image of my family out of my mind. My parents' shocked faces, Allie's faltering smile, the sting of my father's words. What is she doing here? All replayed in endless loops inside my head. I had thought I was stronger, that I had put the past behind me, but seeing them again unearthed everything I had buried. I told myself I didn't care, that they were nothing to me. But deep down I knew I still wanted answers. I still wanted to understand why I had been cast aside so cruelly while Allie was worshipped. It wasn't long before the answers began to surface on their own. A week later, I received a message, not from my parents, but from an old neighbor who still lived near them. Her name was Mrs. Carlson, and she had always been kind to me when I was little, sneaking me cookies or letting me read magazines she no longer needed. Her message was short. "Violet, I thought you should know. Your parents are in trouble. And Allie's marriage may not be what it seems." My stomach churned as I read it. I hadn't known Allie was getting married. My parents hadn't told me anything. But of course, why would they? I was a ghost to them. Curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I wrote back, "What do you mean?" Her reply came quickly. "They're drowning in debt. The house is falling apart. The clinic isn't bringing in money anymore. They've been bragging about Allie marrying someone wealthy, but people are whispering it's built on lies." The words hit me like a punch. My parents, who had always acted superior, who had laughed at my small apartment and my modest life, were crumbling behind closed doors. And Allie, their golden child, was marrying into money, not love. It was the same pattern again. Use, deceive, manipulate. I tried to push it from my mind, but the whispers followed me. A colleague mentioned reading about Allie's fiancé in the local paper, something about a successful businessman from a well-known family. Another friend told me she had seen my parents downtown looking frazzled and desperate. The final blow came when an envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was an invitation. The engagement party of Allie and Thomas Blake. I stared at the embossed letters, my hands shaking. Why would they send this to me? Was it guilt? A cruel joke or some twisted way of showing me how well Allie had done compared to me? Philip, my closest friend at work, and the one who had become like family to me, looked at the invitation and frowned. You don't have to go, Violet. You don't owe them anything. But something inside me whispered differently. I had spent my whole life silenced, erased, treated as though I didn't matter. Maybe this was my chance to confront it all, to see them in their world of lies and finally speak my truth. So I decided to go. The hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers filled with the scent of roses and the sound of clinking glasses. Guests laughed and congratulated Allie, who stood radiant in a white gown, her arm linked with Thomas's. My parents hovered nearby, their smiles wide, their pride on full display. When they saw me, the smiles faltered. My mother's eyes widened in shock, my father's jaw clenched. Allie's lips tightened, though she quickly smoothed it into a practiced grin. Violet, my mother said through gritted teeth, pulling me aside. What are you doing here? I held up the invitation. You sent it. Her eyes darted nervously. It was a mistake. You shouldn't be here. Don't cause trouble. For a moment I almost walked away. Almost let them silence me again. But then I looked around at the opulence, the sparkling decorations, the expensive champagne, the carefully curated illusion. And I thought of all the money I had sent them over the years, all the dreams I had sacrificed, while Allie was given everything. No, I wouldn't stay silent, not anymore. As the evening progressed, the speeches began. Thomas's father stood first, praising his son and welcoming Allie into their family. Then my father rose, speaking proudly of Allie's beauty, her accomplishments, her future. He didn't mention me once, not that I expected him to. But when the applause died down, I stepped forward. My heart pounded. My palms were slick with sweat, but my voice was steady. I'd like to say something. The room quieted. All eyes turned to me. My parents' faces went pale. Allie's smile froze. Thomas looked uneasy. I am Violet. I began, my voice carrying across the hall. I am Allie's older sister. Some of you may not even know I exist because for most of my life my parents acted as though I didn't. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother took a step toward me, hissing under her breath. Stop this! But I pressed on. When I begged to go to college, they told me I was defective. They said I wasn't worth it. They made me work while Allie was given everything: clothes, tutors, vacations, a future. And even after I left, they took my money for years, telling me it was for bills, when in truth it was all for Allie. Whispers filled the room. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward my parents, who stood frozen in shock. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope of documents. Mrs. Carlson had helped me gather bank statements, receipts, proof of the debts and lies. I laid them on the table. This is the truth. The image you see tonight is built on my sacrifices, my pain, and their deceit. The silence was suffocating. Then Thomas's father picked up one of the papers, his eyes narrowing as he read. His face darkened. Is this true? He demanded, turning to my parents. My father stammered. My mother tried to explain, but the room was already shifting. Guests whispered harshly, eyes filled with judgment. Thomas pulled his arm away from Allie, his expression a mix of anger and betrayal. Allie burst into tears, clutching at him. I didn't know, I swear, but her words rang hollow. In that moment, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For years, I had been silenced, erased, treated as nothing. But now the truth was out. They could no longer hide behind lies. Of course, it wasn't the end. Exposing them in public came with consequences. I could already see the fury in my father's eyes, the venom in my mother's glare, the hatred in Allie's sobs. They would retaliate. They would call me vindictive, jealous, cruel. But I didn't care, because for the first time I had spoken my truth, and it was no longer mine alone to carry. That night, as I left the ballroom, whispers followed me like shadows. Some were sympathetic, others judgmental, but none of them mattered. What mattered was that my parents' masks had cracked, and their empire of favoritism and deceit was collapsing. And yet, as I stepped into the cool night air, I knew this wasn't finished. Secrets still lingered in the dark, wounds still festered, and the final reckoning had yet to come. The morning after Allie's engagement party, my phone was flooded with messages. Some were from distant relatives I barely remembered, some from old neighbors, and others from numbers I didn't even recognize. Some offered sympathy, whispering that they had always suspected something was wrong in my family. but most were cruel, parroting the same accusations I had grown up hearing. "You're jealous. You ruined your sister's future. You should have kept quiet." My parents had wasted no time. They had painted me as the villain, the bitter older daughter who couldn't stand to see her younger sister happy. It was the same story they had always told, just now broadcast to a larger audience. I should have expected it. But the words still pierced reopening wounds I thought had begun to heal. For a few days, I avoided the world. I stayed inside, curtains drawn, my phone silenced. I felt both vindicated and devastated. I had told the truth, but the truth was messy and ugly, and it didn't set me free the way I thought it would. Then one evening, there was a knock at my door. My stomach twisted. When I opened it, Allie stood there. Her makeup was smudged, her hair unkempt, her eyes red from crying. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, but something in her voice made me step aside. She sank onto my couch, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "You destroyed everything," she whispered. I sat across from her, my hands folded tightly. "I didn't destroy anything, Allie. I revealed the truth." "That's not the same." Tears filled her eyes. "Thomas's family has cut us off. He won't even speak to me. Do you understand what that means? I lost him. I lost everything. And it's because of you." Her words were a dagger, sharp and deliberate. But I forced myself to stay calm. "You didn't lose him because of me. You lost him because our parents built everything on lies, and you let them. You knew they treated me like garbage. You knew I sacrificed while you thrived, and you never once spoke up for me." She flinched, her lip trembling. For a moment I thought she might apologize, but instead her face hardened. "You were always so dramatic, always wanting to be the victim. Maybe you weren't loved because you made it impossible." Her words sucked the air out of the room. I felt like I was 12 again, standing in the kitchen as my parents told me I was a mistake. But I refused to let her drag me back into that darkness. I stood, my voice steady. "You can leave, Allie." She glared at me through her tears. "You'll regret this. You've made enemies you can't handle." Then she stormed out the door, slamming behind her. I sank onto the couch, shaking. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, there was only a deep ache in my chest, the ache of knowing my sister would never see me as anything but an obstacle. The days that followed were a blur. My parents refused to contact me directly, but through whispers and messages, I learned that their debts were worse than anyone knew. The clinic was on the verge of bankruptcy, creditors were circling, and without Thomas's family, they had no lifeline left. One evening I received a call from Mrs. Carlson, the neighbor who had warned me before. Her voice was grave. "Violet, I think you should know. Your parents are trying to sell the house. They're desperate, and they're blaming you for everything." I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. Of course they were. To them I had always been the problem. And now that their empire of lies was collapsing, it was easier to point the finger at me than to face their own failures. But Mrs. Carlson hesitated before hanging up. "There's something else. I shouldn't even know this, but I heard your parents arguing. Something about you. About why they never wanted to spend money on you." "Violet, I think there's more to this story than you realize." Her words haunted me. That night I barely slept. I tossed and turned, wondering what secret my parents were still hiding. Why had they despised me so much more than Allie? Why had they chosen her over me again and again? The answer came a week later when an envelope arrived in my mailbox. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a letter and a photocopy of a birth certificate. My hands trembled as I read it. The certificate wasn't mine. It was Allie's, and the letter explained everything. "Violet, you don't know me, but I knew your mother many years ago. The truth is, Allie is not your full sister. She has a different father. Your parents built their life around hiding this secret, spoiling her to cover the shame. They resented you because you were proof of the life they wanted to escape. I thought you deserved to know the truth." My breath caught in my throat. I read the words over and over, my vision blurring with tears. Allie wasn't my full sister. My parents had built their favoritism, their cruelty, their entire pattern of abuse on a secret buried in shame. They punished me not because of who I was, but because of what I represented, the child they didn't want, the reminder of choices they regretted. Suddenly, so many memories made sense. My mother's bitterness toward me, My father's coldness, the way they lavished Allie with love while denying me the smallest scraps. Allie wasn't just the favorite, she was their redemption. And I was their mistake. I collapsed onto the floor, the letter shaking in my hands. Rage coursed through me, mingling with sorrow, so deep it felt like drowning. I had spent my whole life begging for their love, and the truth was, I had never even stood a chance. Philip found me there, curled up and sobbing. He knelt beside me, pulling me into his arms. "Violet, what happened?" I handed him the letter. He read it quietly, his jaw tightening. When he finished, he crumpled it in his fist. "They don't deserve you," he whispered fiercely. "They never did. This doesn't define you. It never did." But I couldn't stop crying, because even though I knew he was right, the truth cut too deep. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the letter beside me. I thought of Allie, of the way she had looked at me with contempt, of the way my parents had sneered when I asked for college, and I wondered if they had told me the truth sooner, would anything have been different? Or was I doomed from the start, a scapegoat for their guilt and shame? The truth had surfaced, but it didn't bring peace. It brought more pain, more questions, more anger. And I knew then that the real confrontation was still to come. Because my parents couldn't bury this secret forever. And when I confronted them with it, the facade they had built would finally shatter. I couldn't keep the letter to myself. It burned in my pocket like a coal, scalding me every time I thought of it. For days I carried it everywhere, unable to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to throw it into the fire and forget. But another part, the part that had been silenced for too long, wanted answers, needed them. So one cold afternoon I drove back to my parents' house. The house where I had grown up, where every corner whispered with memories of neglect. The paint was peeling worse than ever, the porch sagging under years of decay. I stood at the door for a long time, clutching the letter in my hand before I finally knocked. My mother answered, surprise flickering across her face before hardening into suspicion. "Violet, why are you here?" "I need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She hesitated, then stepped aside. My father was in his armchair, staring at the muted television. He didn't look at me when I entered. The air smelled of dust and bitterness. I didn't waste time. I laid the letter on the coffee table between us. "I know the truth. About Allie." My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw clenched. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Finally, my mother whispered, "Where did you get this?" "It doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that you lied. My whole life you lied. You spoiled Allie, you punished me, you treated me like I was nothing, and now I know why. Because she isn't even my full sister. Because I reminded you of something you wanted to forget." My father slammed his hand on the armrest. "Enough!" His voice boomed through the room. "You don't know what you're talking about." I stood my ground, trembling but resolute. "Then tell me. Tell me why I was never good enough. Tell me why you called me defective, why you stole my chance at a future, why you threw me away." My mother's hand shook as she picked up the letter, her eyes darting across the words. Finally, she sank into a chair, her face pale. "It's true," she whispered. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Hearing her say it out loud was like being cut open. She glanced at my father, her eyes filling with tears. "Violet, your father isn't Allie's father. I made mistakes when I was young. I thought marrying him would erase them. But then you were born and you looked so much like him. And your father—" She broke off, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. My father's eyes blazed with fury. "Don't you dare put this on me! I raised her like my own." I laughed bitterly, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Raised me. You hated me. You made sure I never forgot I was unwanted. You gave everything to Allie while you stripped me of everything I had." His voice shook with rage. "Because you were a reminder. Every time I looked at you, I saw the betrayal. You were the price I paid for her mistake." The words sliced through me, confirming what I had always felt, but never heard. I had been punished simply for existing. My mother sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "We thought if we gave Allie everything, it would make up for it. That if she shined, no one would look too closely. We thought sacrificing you was the only way to survive." I sank into a chair, my legs trembling. "So that's it. I was the sacrifice. You chose her over me again and again because she was the child you could love without shame." Neither of them denied it. Silence fell heavy, broken only by my ragged breathing. Years of pain, of confusion, of desperate longing for their love, all crystallized into one truth I had never stood a chance. I rose to my feet shaking. Do you realize what you've done to me? You stole my education, my dignity, my sense of worth. You made me believe I was defective when the defect was never mine, it was yours. Your lies, your choices. My father's face reddened, his fists clenched. You think you're better than us now? You stand there with your truths and your accusations, but you wouldn't even exist if it weren't for me putting food on your table all those years. I glared at him, my voice trembling with fury. Food isn't love. Shelter isn't love. You gave me scraps and called it sacrifice, but what you really gave me was scars. And now I know why. My mother sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. Violet, please. We never meant to hurt you like this. I shook my head. You meant every word, every slap of rejection, every sneer, every time you called me useless. You meant it. You wanted me to feel small so Allie could feel big. And it worked. For a long time. But not anymore. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Not the fear of me, but the fear of being exposed. They had built their lives around this secret, and now it was unraveling. I turned to leave, my hands shaking as I reached for the door. My father called after me, his voice sharp. If you walk out now, don't you ever come back. Come. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Then I looked back, my eyes blazing with tears. You made sure of that years ago. And I walked out. The cold air hit me like a cleansing wave. For the first time, the weight of the truth lifted from my shoulders. It didn't erase the pain, but it clarified it. I wasn't defective. I wasn't worthless. I was simply the scapegoat of a secret I hadn't created. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was Allie. Just 2 words. How could you? I stared at the screen, bitterness rising in my throat. How could I? How could they? How could my parents decide that one child deserved love and the other deserved only blame? How could Allie cling to her pedestal even now when she knew the foundation beneath her feet was crumbling? That night, I lay awake, the ceiling swimming above me. The truth had been spoken, but peace still eluded me. Because exposing lies doesn't erase scars. And no matter how far I ran, my family's betrayal would always be part of me. Yet in the darkness, I felt something new stir within me. Not revenge, not rage, but resolve. I would not let their sins define me any longer. I would not carry their shame. The final reckoning was still ahead. But for the first time, I knew I was ready. In the weeks after I confronted my parents, silence settled between us like an iron curtain. No calls, no messages, no apologies. It was as though my existence had been erased once again, just as it had been when I was a child. Only this time the silence didn't crush me. It freed me. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight shift from my shoulders. I wasn't carrying their secrets anymore. I wasn't bound to their shame. I wasn't begging for their scraps of love. The truth was ugly, yes, but it was also liberating. Still, there were nights when grief came creeping back. I would wake up in the dark, my chest tight, tears pricking my eyes. I grieved not for the parents I had, but for the parents I never did. I grieved for the girl I once was, the girl who believed if she tried hard enough, studied long enough, loved deeply enough, she would finally be chosen. That girl was gone, and I mourned her. But mourning gave way to something else, clarity. I began to see how deeply their favoritism had shaped me, how years of being called defective had made me doubt every strength, every talent, every dream. How sacrificing everything for Allie had trained me to put myself last always. But in recognizing that, I also realized something powerful. I had survived it. I had lived through their cruelty, and I had built something of my own. At work, I started raising my hand more often in meetings, letting my ideas be heard. I volunteered to lead projects I once would have shrunk away from. To my surprise, my colleagues listened, respected me, trusted me. Each small step reminded me that I wasn't the worthless daughter my parents said I was. I was Violet, and I was capable. I also began writing again. Late at night, after long days at the office, I would sit at my desk and let the words pour out. Not just stories of pain, but of survival, of resilience, of finding light in the shadows. I didn't know if anyone would ever read them, but for me, writing became a form of healing. Every page was a declaration I am more than what they made me believe. And slowly, piece by piece, my life began to bloom. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Carlson on the street. She hugged me tightly, her eyes kind. "You're stronger than you know, Violet," she whispered. "Don't ever let them take that from you again." Her words warmed me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. But strength doesn't erase scars. A few weeks later, Allie showed up at my door again. She looked different this time, hardened, her eyes sharp, her mouth twisted with bitterness. "You think you've won?" she spat. "But all you've done is destroy everything. Our parents are broken, the clinic is gone, Thomas's family hates us. Do you feel proud?" Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. "I didn't destroy anything, Allie. The truth did. You lived on lies and lies collapse. I just stopped carrying them for you." She sneered. "You're pathetic. You'll always be pathetic." I closed the door before she could say more, and for the first time her words didn't cut me. They slid off like rain against glass. Because I finally understood they weren't about me. They were about her. Allie needed me to be small so she could feel big. But I wasn't small anymore. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. I thought of my parents, of Allie, of the childhood I had lost. And then I thought of the life I was building now, one shaped not by their choices, but by mine. The truth had broken me, yes, but it had also rebuilt me. I know now that family is not always defined by blood. Family is who shows up for you, who lifts you when you fall, who loves you without conditions. I found that family in friends, in mentors, in neighbors who treated me better than my own parents ever did. And in myself, because at last I had learned to love the girl they tried to erase. This is the lesson I want to leave you with. Your worth is not determined by the people who fail to see it. If those who should have loved you first and fiercest chose not to, that is their failure, not yours. You can still rise. You can still build something beautiful. You can still choose yourself. So here I am, Violet, the eldest daughter who was always blamed, always silenced, always cast aside. And yet I survived. I found my voice. I told my truth. And maybe, just maybe, that's the sweetest revenge of all. Thank you for staying with me through my story. If any part of it touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to my channel for more stories like this, and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Did you find a way to break free? Because in the end, our stories aren't just wounds, they're bridges. And maybe by sharing them, we can all feel a little less alone.